You think catching your husband cheating is the worst betrayal? It is not. The true nightmare is my best friend of 15 years opening her front door. Revealing my entire life is a staged play by the two people I trusted most. They thought I was blind prey. They had no idea a cornered woman could forge devastation into an invisible blade. Real monsters do not hide under beds. They smile and sip coffee right in your living room. Hello? Dear listeners of Violet Revenge Stories, thank you so much for joining me today. Unfortunately, YouTube has demonetized our channel, leaving us with no budget to operate. If you find today's story engaging, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our dedicated team can afford their living expenses and continue creating these thrilling tales for you. You can easily offer your support by scanning the QR code displayed on your screen or by clicking the donation link provided in the video description or the pinned comment below. My name is Madeline Ross. I am 34 years old, and my days are defined by anticipating disaster. As a senior risk analyst for Veridian Apex Innovations, my entire career revolves around identifying vulnerabilities. I look at spreadsheets, corporate structures, and market trends, hunting for the hidden fractures that could bring a multi-million-dollar empire crashing to the ground. I am paid to be paranoid. I am paid to see the worst in every situation before it actually happens. Yet, the universe possesses a cruel sense of humor. I spent thousands of hours meticulously predicting corporate catastrophes, but I was completely blind to the spectacular collapse of my own personal life. I believed I resided in an untouchable sanctuary. My existence in the beautiful, rain-swept city of Seattle was a portrait of modern success. This illusion was upheld by the two pillars of my existence: my husband, Julian, and my best friend of 15 years, Harper. Julian was the director of an aggressive investment fund. He was a man of sharp intellect, tailored Italian suits, and a relentless ambition that kept him tethered to his phone and his office. His schedule was a grueling marathon of meetings, corporate dinners, and cross-country flights. I accepted his constant absence as the price of our luxurious lifestyle. I loved him with a quiet, steadfast loyalty, trusting his ambition was for our shared future. Then there was Harper. Harper and I had been inseparable since our freshman year of college. She was a freelance interior designer, a woman who lived her life in bright, unapologetic strokes of color. Her bohemian, free-spirited nature was the perfect antidote to my rigid, data-driven mindset. She was my confidant, the keeper of my deepest secrets, and the sister I never had. I would have trusted her with my life. The illusion shattered on a typical dreary Friday afternoon. The Seattle sky was a heavy canvas of bruised violet clouds, weeping a steady, freezing drizzle. Inside the gleaming headquarters of Veridian Apex Innovations, my team had managed to finalize a massive quarterly risk assessment 3 hours ahead of schedule. The sudden freedom felt exhilarating. I remembered that Harper had recently signed a massive contract to design a boutique hotel. I wanted to celebrate her triumph. I stopped at an exclusive wine merchant and purchased a rare, limited edition bottle of Pinot Noir. I decided to drive to her place completely unannounced. It was supposed to be a joyous, spontaneous surprise. Harper lived in a high-security, luxury apartment building downtown, a towering structure of glass and steel that overlooked the dark waters of the bay. I took the private elevator to her floor, cradling the velvet-wrapped bottle of wine in my arms. A warm, excited smile stretched across my face. I walked down the hushed, carpeted hallway, stopped in front of her heavy oak door, and confidently pressed the brass doorbell. A soft, elegant chime echoed from deep within the apartment. I stood there, fully expecting to hear Harper's bright voice calling out to me. Instead, the sounds that leaked through the thick wood were entirely wrong. I heard a muffled, sharp clatter, like a heavy vase being knocked against a glass coffee table in a desperate hurry. This was immediately followed by the heavy, frantic thud of footsteps. They were not the light, graceful steps of a woman walking across her own living room. They were heavy, panicked, and chaotic. My analytical brain instantly registered the anomaly. A cold prickle of unease washed over my skin. The deadbolt clicked loudly. The heavy oak door swung inward. The cheerful greeting I had prepared instantly died in my throat. The bottle of wine suddenly felt like a heavy block of lead in my frozen hands. The person standing in the doorway was not my free-spirited best friend. It was Julian. Julian, who had kissed my cheek at 6 o'clock that morning, clutching his leather briefcase, and told me he was boarding a direct flight to San Francisco for a weekend financial seminar. Yet here he stood in Harper's apartment. His expensive dress shirt was violently wrinkled and pulled out of his trousers. The top 3 buttons were ripped open, exposing his bare chest. His tie was nowhere to be seen, but it was his face that caused my entire reality to fracture. He stared at me with eyes blown wide in sheer, unadulterated terror. His skin had turned the color of wet ash, entirely drained of blood. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a sheer cliff, realizing the ground had just crumbled beneath his feet. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. In that suffocating silence, the curtain fell on the life I knew. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I expected Julian to drop to his knees. I expected a confession tumbling from his lips, or at least a frantic, guilty stutter. Instead, I witnessed a terrifying metamorphosis. The blood rushed back into his face. His posture straightened, shifting from a cornered animal to a composed executive in the span of 3 seconds. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, offering a breathless, perfectly calibrated chuckle. Before he could speak, a voice echoed from the hallway behind him. "Julian, did you find the tape measure?" Harper stepped into the foyer. She was wearing a silk robe, her hair piled messily on top of her head. When she saw me, she let out a loud, theatrical gasp, clapping both hands over her mouth. "Oh my God, Madeline!" Harper squealed, her eyes darting to Julian and then back to me. "You ruined it. You completely ruined the surprise." I stood frozen, the heavy bottle of wine pressing into my chest. "Surprise?" Julian stepped forward, wrapping a warm, confident arm around my shoulders. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the faint, undeniable perfume of my best friend. "Darling," he said, his voice smooth and steady. "I took an early flight back. I wanted to coordinate with Harper. We were trying to secure that contemporary painting you admired at the downtown gallery last month for our anniversary." Harper did not miss a single beat. She seamlessly glided into her role, grabbing my arm and pulling me into the apartment. She ushered me toward the kitchen island, enthusiastically explaining how they had been plotting this secret mission for 2 weeks. She grabbed her silver tablet and unlocked the screen, swiping through a digital portfolio of abstract art. "Look," Harper said, pointing at a vibrant canvas on the screen. "The gallery owner only gave us a 24-hour window to place a hold on it. Julian was terrified he would choose the wrong frame, so he rushed over here to consult with me." Julian leaned against the granite counter, crossing his arms and smiling fondly at me. "I wanted it to be perfect. You are impossible to surprise, Madeline." Then, Harper produced the masterpiece of their deception. She slid a printed document across the counter. It was a deposit receipt from the gallery, complete with official letterhead, a transaction identification number, and a sum of $15,000 paid from Julian's private account. The date and time stamp were from earlier that morning. It was flawless. It was a terrifyingly perfect alibi. For a fleeting second, the gaslighting worked. A heavy wave of guilt washed over me. I felt like a paranoid, hysterical wife who had just burst in on 2 people trying to do something beautiful for her. That is the true horror of betrayal by those closest to you. They know exactly how to manipulate your reality, how to twist your perception until you question your own sanity. They had built a watertight narrative. But I am a risk analyst. My brain is hardwired to look for anomalies. And as I forced a bright, apologetic smile onto my face, apologizing profusely for ruining their grand gesture, my eyes scanned the living room. I stepped forward to hug them both, wrapping my arms around Harper first, then my husband. It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to physically recoil from their touch. I buried my face in Julian's shoulder, acting the part of the relieved, overwhelmed wife. From that specific angle, my line of sight fell directly onto the white leather sofa in the center of the room. There, sitting haphazardly among the decorative pillows, was Julian's Italian leather briefcase. The brass clasps were undone, the top flap pushed back. Spilling out of the central compartment was a thick manila folder. The edge of the document was visible, and stamped clearly in deep blue ink was the ornate crest of my grandfather's family trust. My heart flatlined. There was absolutely zero logical reason for Julian to bring my family's private estate documents to buy an anniversary painting. The math did not add up. The data was corrupted. The facade they had so carefully constructed instantly cracked, revealing a dark, terrifying abyss underneath. "I am so sorry. Guys," I laughed, pulling back and wiping a fake tear from my eye. "I feel like such a fool. Let us open this wine and toast to my absolute lack of patience." I spent the next 2 hours drinking, smiling, and playing the role of the blissful, oblivious target. I let them believe they had won. I let them bask in the arrogant glow of their successful deception. That night, back in our own bed, Julian fell asleep quickly, his breathing deep and even. I lay perfectly still in the dark. I did not shed a single tear. Crying is a biological response to emotional pain, but I was no longer operating on emotion. I was operating on cold, calculated survival. At precisely 2 o'clock in the morning, I silently slipped out of bed. I crept into his home office, moving like a ghost. I opened his laptop. He had changed his password, but I knew his cognitive patterns. It took me less than 5 minutes to bypass his security. Using a customized flash drive I kept for emergency corporate data recovery, I installed a stealth cross-access monitoring program deep within his system registry. It was a ghost protocol that would mirror every keystroke, every deleted email, and every encrypted message directly to my own private server. I left absolutely no digital footprint. When the sun rose, casting a pale gray light over Seattle, I walked into the kitchen and started brewing the morning coffee. Julian walked in, rubbing his eyes, and kissed my forehead. I smiled up at him, bright and loving. That morning marked the beginning of my dual existence. By day, I remained the sweet, trusting wife who packed his lunches and wished him well at work. By night, sitting in the blue glow of my monitors, I transformed into a relentless predator. I was no longer just an analyst, I was a hunter, quietly collecting every jagged shard of their betrayal, preparing to construct a trap they would never see coming. The data began to pour into my hidden server like a toxic, unstoppable river. Over the next 72 hours, I barely slept, eating nothing but dry toast and drinking countless cups of black coffee. I sat bathed in the harsh, blue glare of my dual monitors, sifting through the digital wreckage of my entire adult life. At first, it was the standard, nauseating debris of infidelity. I found encrypted text messages hidden behind fake application icons, locked photo vaults filled with sickeningly domestic selfies, and luxury hotel booking confirmations scattered across the country. By meticulously cross-referencing the metadata, the dates, and the locations, I established the undeniable timeline. My husband and my best friend had not made a sudden, drunken mistake on a lonely weekend. They had been sleeping together for exactly 3 years, 36 months of shared smiles over dinner tables, 36 months of Harper asking for intimate details about my marriage while secretly destroying it, 36 months of Julian kissing my forehead, telling me he loved me, before retreating to the bathroom to text her goodnight. The psychological violence of that realization was a physical weight on my chest. Every birthday party, every holiday gathering, every shared vacation over the last 3 years had been a grotesque, choreographed performance. But as a senior risk analyst, I know that human behavior always leaves a deeper, more complex pattern if you look closely enough. The sheer volume of their hidden communication did not match a simple, passionate affair. There were too many secure spreadsheets, too many locked PDF files, and far too many complex legal templates passing between their private email addresses. Lovers usually send poetry, pictures, or desperate declarations of affection. They do not send encrypted financial projections and notarized property deeds. I wrote a custom decryption algorithm and launched a brute force attack on a hidden partition buried deep within Julian's work drive. It took 14 hours for the firewall to finally break. When the files unspooled across my screen, the true magnitude of their betrayal slammed into me with the force of a freight train. This was not a romance. It was a calculated, cold-blooded heist. It was a meticulously orchestrated corporate raid, and I was the unsuspecting target. 6 months ago, my grandfather passed away after a long illness. Among the numerous assets left to me in his family trust was a massive, abandoned industrial plot on the outskirts of the city limits. To the naked eye of a passerby, it was just hundreds of acres of cracked concrete, rusting steel warehouses, and overgrown weeds. But in the booming, land-starved Seattle real estate market, that dead zone was a dormant gold mine. Independent commercial appraisals valued the property at roughly $35 million. Because the estate was still tangled in a lengthy bureaucratic probate process, I had barely paid attention to it, willfully leaving the preliminary legal paperwork in Julian's supposedly capable hands. That blind trust was my fatal error. The documents I had seen spilling out of his Italian leather briefcase at Harper's apartment were the absolute keys to my total ruin. Julian was viciously leveraging his legal status as my spouse to systematically dismantle my inheritance behind my back. He had acquired the services of a heavily indebted, corrupt notary public. Together, they were flawlessly forging my signature on a mountain of power of attorney documents, title transfers, and commercial loan applications. Julian's plan was shockingly brazen and terrifyingly smart. He was using the industrial plot as collateral to secure a massive, high-interest private mortgage worth $20 million from an unregulated shadow banking firm. But stealing the money was only half the battle. If $20 million suddenly appeared in Julian's bank account, red flags would instantly deploy across federal tax agencies. They needed a foolproof way to clean the dirty cash so they could vanish without a trace. That is exactly where my darling best friend stepped in. Harper was not just his mistress, she was his dedicated money launderer, using her legitimate freelance interior design business as an impenetrable front. She had created a complex labyrinth of phantom vendor accounts and offshore shell companies. I found the drafted invoices neatly organized in her folders. They were billing hundreds of thousands of dollars for non-existent luxury services, $600,000 for imported Italian marble, $400,000 for bespoke, hand-blown lighting fixtures, $350,000 for exclusive architectural consulting. All of these invoices were billed to a dummy development corporation Julian had set up. The entire system was designed to siphon the massive loan payout drop by drop, funneling the money directly into Harper's untouchable, anonymous accounts in the Cayman Islands. The sheer brilliance of their malice left me physically breathless. They had weaponized my unwavering trust to build a financial guillotine right above my neck. If I remained ignorant for just another 4 weeks, the loan would be finalized and approved. The $20 million would evaporate across international borders in the blink of an eye. Julian and Harper would board a private jet to a tropical paradise, leaving behind no forwarding address and no trace of their crimes. And what exactly would happen to me? The fallout would be absolutely apocalyptic. When the ruthless private lenders inevitably came collecting on the defaulted $20 million mortgage, my name would be the only one printed on the fraudulent legal documents. I would lose my home, my pristine career at Viridian Apex Innovations, and every single dime of my retirement savings. Worse, the federal authorities would immediately launch a massive criminal investigation. The entirely fabricated paper trail would point directly and exclusively to me. I would face multiple felony charges of wire fraud, bank fraud, and grand larceny. I was looking at a mandatory minimum sentence of 25 years in a federal penitentiary. They were not just planning to steal my money. They were planning to throw my entire existence into an incinerator so they could comfortably warm their hands by the fire. I pushed my ergonomic chair back from the desk. The silence of my home office felt incredibly heavy, charged with a new, terrifying electric current. An average woman might scream into the void. An average woman might print out the forged documents, hurl them at her cheating husband's face, demand an immediate divorce, and drag him into a messy public court battle. But taking them to civil court would mean years of exorbitant legal fees, agonizing mediations, and endless stress. It would give Julian the necessary time to hide his other assets. It would give Harper the perfect platform to play the tragic, misunderstood victim. It would give them a fighting chance to escape with at least a fraction of their dignity. I absolutely did not want to fight them. I wanted to completely and permanently eradicate them. They worshipped money and freedom above all else in this world. They had willingly sacrificed a decade of friendship and a sacred vow of marriage upon the altar of absolute greed. So, I made a silent, unbreakable vow of my own right then and there. I would not shed a single tear for the ghosts of the people I thought I knew. I would not hire a loud, aggressive divorce attorney. Instead, I would use my professional expertise as a master of risk and ruin to become their ultimate, inescapable nightmare. I would orchestrate a collapse so profound, so devastatingly complete, that they would never financially or socially recover for the rest of their natural lives. I was going to take everything they coveted, and I was going to make them unknowingly hand it to me on a silver platter. I needed an architect for my grand illusion. Through the encrypted dark web channels, I occasionally monitored for corporate security threats. I located a disgruntled, recently terminated state urban planning director. I paid him precisely $50,000 in entirely untraceable cryptocurrency. His task was incredibly specific and required absolute discretion. He was to draft a flawless, highly classified state development dossier. We named it Project Elysium. Project Elysium was a fabricated, multi-billion-dollar government initiative designed to transform the neglected industrial outskirts of Seattle into a massive, eco-friendly technological hub. My grandfather's supposedly useless, rusting acreage was positioned exactly at the epicenter of this fictional paradise. The dossier the forger delivered was an absolute masterpiece of bureaucratic deception. It included incredibly detailed topographical maps, hundreds of pages of environmental impact studies, and highly classified budgetary projections bearing counterfeit state government seals. The most crucial detail buried within the pages was a drafted expropriation order. It explicitly stated that the state government was prepared to invoke the power of eminent domain, aggressively buying the land for a staggering 15 times its current market appraisal to avoid lengthy public domain delays. 15 times $35 million is over $500 million. It was a sum of money large enough to completely short-circuit the rational mind of even the most disciplined investment banker. I did not just hand Julian this explosive information. If I offered it on a silver platter, his natural paranoia would immediately flare up. He had to believe he was stealing it. I set up a secure, encrypted email account and sent the heavy Elysium dossier to my primary work address. I meticulously flagged the message as highly confidential internal intelligence, supposedly leaked from the legislative lobbying arm of Viridian Apex Innovations. I also included a fake internal corporate memo noting that the land currently had minor, immediate legal encumbrances. The memo cited fictional zoning disputes and overdue back taxes that required a quick injection of liquid capital to clean up before the state would proceed with the monumental, historic buyout. That evening, the rain was lashing heavily against the windows of our home. I intentionally left my work laptop open and unlocked on the marble kitchen island. I told Julian I was exhausted and taking a long, hot bath to soothe a blinding migraine. I locked the bathroom door, sat on the edge of the porcelain tub, and pulled out my phone. The hidden monitoring software I had embedded in his network tracked his digital movements perfectly. Exactly 4 minutes after the bathroom door clicked shut, he accessed my laptop. I sat in the silent, steamy room, watching the log files populate in real time on my screen. I watched him open the confidential email. I watched him download the entire Project Elysium file, forward the massive attachment to his own encrypted external drive, and immediately scrubbed the search history to cover his tracks. The heavy iron hook was set deep in his throat. Greed is a devastatingly predictable toxin. Once it enters the bloodstream, it completely blinds its host to logic, patience, and risk. The financial data streaming into my private server over the next 3 weeks painted a vivid picture of absolute, frantic desperation. Julian and Harper thought they possessed the ultimate insider trading secret. Blinded by the promise of $500 million, they completely abandoned their original, slow-moving $20 million mortgage scam. Why settle for a $20 million fraudulent loan when you could own a $500 million government payout outright? But to secure that massive payout, they needed to own the land completely. It had to be unburdened by my name and legally separated from our marital assets before the fake government announcement hit the press. They needed massive, immediate liquid capital to buy me out and clear those fictional legal hurdles mentioned in the leaked memo. Their scramble for cash was a spectacular display of financial suicide. They liquidated every single mutual fund, stock portfolio, and retirement account they possessed, willingly swallowing massive early withdrawal penalties. Julian secretly took out a massive second mortgage on our primary residence. Harper drained her business accounts dry and took out predatory, high-interest loans from unregulated private equity sharks. These were the kind of shadowy lenders who do not send polite collection letters, but rather send individuals who break kneecaps when payments bounce. They pooled every single cent they could scrounge, roughly $8 million in total, into a newly registered anonymous holding company designed specifically to purchase the land. Now, it was time for my grand performance. I began to physically manufacture the appearance of an impending nervous breakdown. I stopped wearing makeup entirely. I drank endless cups of black coffee to induce deep, bruising dark circles under my eyes. I paced our living room late at night, muttering frantically about the crushing, unbearable pressure of my upcoming quarterly risk reviews at Viridian Apex Innovations. One rainy Sunday evening, I sat on the living room floor surrounded by towering stacks of entirely meaningless corporate paperwork. When Julian walked through the front door, I dropped my pen, buried my face in my trembling hands, and let out a long, shuddering sob. "I cannot do this anymore. Julian," I whispered, my voice breaking perfectly. "My job is literally killing me. The firm is demanding 80-hour weeks, and this land my grandfather left me, it is an absolute, suffocating nightmare. The estate lawyers are relentlessly hounding me about back taxes and zoning violations. I am drowning in paperwork. I just want it gone. I want a clean slate so I can just breathe." Julian immediately knelt beside me on the expensive rug. He wrapped his strong arms around me, expertly playing the role of the ultimate, supportive husband. His eyes, however, were entirely cold, calculating the exact geometry of his impending victory over my shoulder. "Sweetheart, you are burning out," he murmured softly, stroking my hair. "You need to focus on your health and your career right now. Let me take this heavy burden off your shoulders. We can easily transfer the entire estate, all the physical assets, and all the associated liabilities, solely into my name. I will handle the aggressive lawyers. I will pay the back taxes from my own private accounts. You will never have to think about that rusty wasteland ever again." "Would you really do that for me?" I looked up at him, widening my eyes to feign utter, helpless gratitude. "Of course," he smiled warmly, kissing my forehead. "I am your husband. It is my job to protect you." Exactly 2 days later, we sat in the freezing, sterile conference room of a high-end corporate law firm downtown. Julian had aggressively rushed the paperwork through his own ruthless attorneys. The contract sitting on the glass table was thick and bound in heavy black leather. It explicitly stated that I was unconditionally transferring 100% of the property rights, alongside any and all past, present, or future legal and financial liabilities, exclusively to Julian. In exchange, his anonymous holding company would pay me a flat sum of $8 million, legally and permanently separating the asset from our joint marital estate. I picked up the heavy, gold-plated pen provided by the lawyer. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, letting Julian sweat in the agonizing silence. Before signing my name in smooth, elegant cursive, Julian eagerly grabbed the pen and signed his name next to mine. I noticed his hand was shaking slightly. It was not from nerves, but from the raw, unadulterated adrenaline of a predator finally closing its jaws on a helpless kill. He looked down at the finalized, notarized contract, and then he looked across the table at me. I saw the absolute, blinding arrogance radiating from his pores. He was mentally popping champagne corks, entirely convinced he had just legally swindled his exhausted, naive wife out of a multi-million-dollar gold mine. He believed he had brilliantly secured a future of limitless wealth and freedom for himself and his mistress without having to share a single dime of the profits. He truly thought he was the untouchable master of the universe. He had absolutely no idea that he had just gleefully signed his own financial and legal death warrant. The ink on the heavy leather-bound transfer documents was barely dry when the final act of their cruel, orchestrated play commenced. Having legally severed the massive industrial acreage from our shared assets and secured what he believed was his golden ticket, Julian immediately discarded the devoted husband persona. He did not even wait a full 24 hours to strike. The very next morning, as I walked out of the corporate lobby, I was served with aggressively drafted, expedited divorce papers by a ruthless process server. By noon, every single joint credit card bearing my name was completely frozen. By sunset, his expensive Italian suits were gone from our master closet, and he had publicly, brazenly moved into Harper's high-security luxury apartment. He threw our decade together away with the cold, casual indifference of a man discarding a broken umbrella. My former best friend, entirely drunk on her perceived victory, simply could not resist twisting the knife one last time. 2 days later, a small, heavily insured courier package arrived directly at my office desk. Inside rested a single silver key. It was the spare key to my marital home, a key she had apparently possessed in secret for over 3 years. Attached to the cold metal was a thick, cream-colored card, written in her elegant, sweeping handwriting. It read, "Thank you for handing over both your man and your brilliant future to me." I stared at the vicious little note under the harsh fluorescent lights of my office, feeling absolutely no anger. I felt only a profound, clinical amusement. I did not call them screaming into the receiver. I did not drive over to smash her windows. I simply packed 3 suitcases of my essential personal belongings, leaving the expensive designer furniture, the crystal glasses, and the shattered memories behind in that hollow, echoing house. I quietly relocated to a neat, minimalist, 1-bedroom apartment in the vibrant heart of downtown Seattle. I immediately changed my phone number, routed their email addresses to a black hole server, and completely vanished from their radar, to Julian and Harper. My absolute radio silence was the ultimate, undeniable proof of my pathetic, broken defeat. In reality, my silence was merely the eerie, terrifying calm of the ocean receding rapidly just before a catastrophic tsunami makes landfall. While I arranged my new, quiet life, Julian and Harper were busy suffocating in their own monumental arrogance. Through the whispers of former mutual acquaintances, I learned they had rented out the entire glass-enclosed rooftop terrace of the most astronomically expensive seafood restaurant in the city. It was a lavish, catered spectacle intended to formally announce their new relationship to Seattle high society and to preemptively celebrate the dawn of their magnificent new era. They drank endless bottles of $1,000 vintage champagne, laughed loudly with shallow friends who had effortlessly switched loyalties, and toasted to their own undeniable brilliance. They stood at the absolute pinnacle of their world, entirely intoxicated by their perceived genius. I knew they were waking up every single morning and desperately refreshing the state news websites, eagerly awaiting the grand public announcement of the government land acquisition. They genuinely believed that within a matter of weeks, the state officials would arrive with $500 million to reward their ruthless ambition. They were so utterly blinded by the dazzling mirage of unimaginable wealth that they completely failed to look down at the ground beneath their feet. They had absolutely no idea that the highly classified dossier was nothing more than a carefully constructed ghost story. They did not know that the sprawling industrial plot they had just sacrificed their entire life savings, mortgaged their futures, and sold their souls to acquire was not a gateway to paradise. It was a suffocating, inescapable tomb, and they had just joyfully swallowed the only key. Exactly 14 days after the last crystal glass was raised at their arrogant rooftop celebration, reality crashed through their front door. It did not arrive with a polite knock. It arrived at 6 o'clock in the morning, accompanied by the deafening crack of a heavy battering ram splintering the solid oak door of Harper's luxury apartment. A joint task force of heavily armed federal agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and inspectors from the Environmental Protection Agency flooded the sleek, designer living room. They dragged Julian and Harper from their expensive silk sheets, forcing them onto the cold hardwood floor while agents systematically dismantled their perfect life, seizing every computer, tablet, and financial document in sight. The spectacular illusion I had woven around them had finally evaporated, revealing the horrifying toxic truth underneath. The massive industrial acreage my grandfather left behind was not a dormant gold mine, and the state government had absolutely no intention of transforming it into an eco-friendly technological paradise. In reality, during the late 1980s, long before modern ecological regulations existed, that specific tract of land had been leased to a corrupt chemical manufacturing firm. For nearly a decade, they had illegally dumped thousands of gallons of highly corrosive, carcinogenic waste directly into the soil. The land was not a future utopia. It was a ticking ecological time bomb, a massive lethal hazard zone that the federal authorities had just officially designated as a priority cleanup site. This was the magnificent trap I had laid, by aggressively rushing the divorce and forcing me to sign that heavy, leather-bound transfer contract. Julian had legally absorbed every single ounce of liability. He had specifically demanded 100% of the property rights, alongside any and all past, present, or future legal and financial burdens. He thought he was outsmarting me. Instead, he willingly placed his own neck directly into a federal noose. The Environmental Protection Agency immediately slapped his newly formed, underfunded shell company with a mandatory, non-negotiable remediation order. He was legally forced to pay for the complete chemical decontamination of the entire acreage. The estimated cost of the cleanup operation was a staggering $25 million. Julian was instantly, permanently annihilated. The $8 million he and Harper had scraped together, stolen, and borrowed from predatory lenders, was immediately seized by the government to cover the initial fines. But the federal agents did not stop there. Following the massive, bloody money trail left by Julian's desperate scramble for cash, the forensic accountants kicked down Harper's door. They dragged her intricate, shadowy labyrinth into the blinding light of day. Her offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands were immediately frozen under international anti-money laundering protocols. The federal investigators found the hundreds of fake invoices, the phantom vendor accounts, and the undeniable proof of her extensive financial crimes. The dominoes fell with spectacular, devastating speed. They were no longer just facing total bankruptcy. They were facing a barrage of severe federal felony charges, carrying mandatory minimum sentences that would keep them both behind bars for decades. Their grand transactional romance shattered the moment the cold steel of the handcuffs locked around their wrists. 3 weeks later, I walked into the echoing, marble-floored hallway of the federal courthouse for their preliminary arraignment hearing. The scene unfolding before me was a masterpiece of human destruction. Julian and Harper, completely stripped of their tailored suits and designer dresses, stood wearing bright orange, state-issued jumpsuits. They were no longer the smug, untouchable architects of my ruin. They were cornered, rabid animals, right there in the crowded hallway, surrounded by armed federal marshals and aggressive defense attorneys. They violently turned on each other. Harper was sobbing hysterically, her face red and swollen, screaming that Julian had manipulated her, that he was a monster who ruined her brilliant career. Julian shouted back, his voice cracking with sheer panic, cursing her name and blaming her insatiable greed for pushing him into the fraudulent loans. The profound, ugly truth of their bond was laid bare for the entire world to see. There was no love there. There was only a parasite and its host, dying together. I stood quietly near the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom, wearing a perfectly tailored, elegant navy blue suit. As the bailiffs aggressively grabbed Julian's arms to escort him away, his frantic eyes darted across the crowd and locked onto mine, the color completely drained from his face. He stopped struggling. A look of profound, agonizing realization washed over his features as he finally understood the magnitude of what I had done. "Madeline," he choked out, his voice a pathetic, desperate whimper. "Please, you have to tell them I did not know. You have to testify for me. Please, Madeline, save me." I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of anger or vindictiveness. I simply took 2 slow, measured steps forward. I smiled gently, looking deeply into the terrified eyes of the man who had tried to throw my life into an incinerator. I leaned in close, letting the chilling silence hang between us for a fraction of a second, and whispered softly into his ear, "The surprise party you prepared at Harper's house that day was truly wonderful." I did not wait for his reaction. I turned my back on his gasps and Harper's endless wailing. I walked with my head held high, the rhythmic click of my heels echoing sharply against the cold marble floor. I pushed open the heavy brass doors of the courthouse and stepped out into the crisp, vibrant afternoon air. The Seattle sky had finally cleared, and the bright, warm sunlight washed over me. I took a deep breath of freedom, leaving the traitors to rot in the dark, suffocating grave they had so eagerly dug with their own 2 hands. Thank you so much, dear listeners, for tuning in to the very end of this journey. Where in the world are you listening from today? Please let me know down in the comments. If you found today's story satisfying and wish to support our channel, please consider donating just $1 by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or pinned comment. Your incredible generosity allows our team to feed their families and continues to fuel the creation of these stories for you. Until next time, stay safe and always trust your instincts.